Her eyes snap wide open in disbelief. Elsewhere, a young boy wakes in a lavish room, thinking of the past. He remembers a time when every day was filled with joy, but he violently shakes the memories from his head. A cynical smirk crosses his face as he dismisses the thought. He tells himself that the person from those memories is no longer who he is today. Trapped in this grand mansion, he feels completely unsatisfied with his life, and his frustration explodes into a sudden, violent outburst, leaving a young maid trembling in the aftermath. He asks how many times he must repeat himself. The shattered teacup lies as evidence of his displeasure. He roars at the maid for serving him such weak tea. She timidly explains she only used the designated amount, but her excuse only provokes another violent reaction. He's appalled that she would dare to talk back. He reminds her that he is Zetz of the Unruh ducal family. But as the tirade continues, a wave of regret hits him. He never meant for his anger to go this far. He's left wondering why he can no longer control his emotions. He tries to justify his actions to himself, insisting that he's right, and that she is the one who is wrong. He dismisses her, saying he needs some fresh air, and with that, he turns and walks away. Outside, the perfect weather does nothing to soothe him. He's dissatisfied with everything around him. The weak tea from this morning, the heavy burden of his noble duties, and the academy that lets in commoners. He clutches his head, screaming internally that he hates it all, and so he tries to convince himself that what happened before was exactly as it should have been. His thoughts are interrupted by a condescending voice. The scene shifts to a memory of a young noble, flanked by his cronies, asking if she's the commoner who got into the academy. A terrified girl with glasses can barely manage a reply. The boy smirks, telling her not to be so scared. He claims he only wants to foster friendships and compete for the top spot. But a voiceover reveals that at the time, this was genuinely what he believed. The younger Zetz then extends an invitation to a ball at his family's home. The girl is completely taken aback by his invitation. But before she can even answer, the memory is cut short by that same mocking voice. Zetz's eye snaps wide with rage. He whirls around, demanding to know who spoke. And in a violent outburst, he hurls a nearby statue. His mind screams the same familiar refrain, as the other students cry out in alarm, that he is not the one who is wrong. The girl can only watch, frozen in fear. With tears in her eyes, the girl timidly declines his offer. Zetz is utterly stunned by her refusal. He grabs her, demanding to know why she would turn him down. His grip tightens as his pride as a noble is shattered. And once again, his mind repeats the same old lie, until a calm voice tells him to let her go. A new student stands before them, interrupting the confrontation. Zetz can only stare up in disbelief. The girl recognizes the newcomer, calling him Marlin. And this Marlin, a fellow scholarship student, is here to stop Zetz. Marlin stares Zetz down, repeating his command. He tells him to let her go, and with a firm grip, he pries Zetz's hand away. Zetz is about to apologize, but the girl surprisingly defends his pride. His mind flashes back to the apology he almost gave. But Marlin insists that he apologize to her properly. The scene cuts away to a dark liquid being poured, filling an ornate, steaming teacup. A spoon is used to stir the drink. The simple, quiet action hangs in the air. A young boy with light hair takes a sip from his cup. He sits in a garden gazebo, admitting he's no match for his grandfather. It's as if the old man knew he was coming, preparing a spread of sweets. And he has to admit, the tea is truly exceptional. An elderly butler stands before him, expressing his gratitude. He addresses the boy as Herbert while pouring him another cup. The butler then asks if something is troubling the young master. Herbert calmly asks what would make him think that. The butler explains that he only visits when he's truly worried, and that he misses seeing someone named Nell smile. But Herbert dismisses the idea, insisting it's nothing that serious. But his thoughts drift back to the academy, and a confrontation from his past. He remembers Marlin standing up to him. Herbert had mocked him for being a commoner on scholarship, but Marlin had simply stated his name. Herbert then began to lecture him on proper etiquette, insisting that a commoner must always show respect. Marlin, however, cited the Academy's rule of equality, a rule that Herbert immediately dismissed as a meaningless facade. He then declared his noble status, putting Marlin firmly in his place. Herbert explodes with rage, screaming that a commoner dared to address him so informally, shocking the other students. A girl watching from a window seems to find his outburst completely ridiculous and outdated, but Marlin remains unfazed by the tantrum. He calmly states that Herbert is the one who owes an apology. Herbert seethes, refusing to be lectured by someone beneath him. The weight of his own noble pride seems to crush him. He can't stand the thought of such people tainting his academy. Even his own followers wonder if he's completely lost his mind. In the past, Herbert throws down the gauntlet. His glove lies on the floor, a formal challenge issued. Back in the present, he calls out to his butler. He announces his firm decision to fight a duel. He asks with a confident smile if the old man will cheer for him. The butler, however, looks deeply troubled by this news. Herbert explains the duel is in 3 days against that commoner. He's sure that a victory will make everyone recognize his greatness. He believes all his classmates will finally understand, and that even Nell will have to acknowledge him. He tells the old man not to worry, boasting about his magical talent. The butler listens, his expression unreadable. A quiet, resigned agreement is all he offers. He states that there is no way Master Herbert could ever lose. His face lights up at the butler's words. He grandly declares that the butler truly understands him, that he would never stoop to the level of a commoner. But the butler's expression is one of quiet sorrow. He explains that once he wins the duel, he plans to start over. He'll conduct himself with the patience and dignity befitting his noble house. The butler can only think of the trouble his master is causing. But Herbert is lost in his own world, happily discussing his training. Their quiet moment is shattered when a dark portal opens before them. A swirling black vortex hangs ominously in the air. Herbert screams in terror, telling the old man to get back. The butler shields the boy, his own face a mask of disbelief. He recognizes it as a powerful, unclassified form of magic, and in a brilliant display of tactical genius, Herbert throws a sugar cube at it. The void implodes, leaving behind a single sealed envelope. It floats down gently, an impossible delivery from an unknown sender. Herbert and his butler can only stare in stunned silence. He cautiously reaches out to take the mysterious object. It's a letter, sealed with an ornate wax crest. The butler leans in, his expression grim. He recognizes the seal as belonging to the Unruh ducal family, but he notes that it's far too perfect, almost a forgery. Herbert turns the letter over, his eyes widening in shock. The handwriting is his own, addressed to his past self. He scoffs at the ridiculous idea of a letter from the future. But the message inside is simple and direct. You will lose the duel. Herbert's eyes widen in utter shock. The letter describes a future of complete humiliation. He crumples the paper, refusing to believe such nonsense. It continues, predicting he'll be disowned and his engagement broken. He incinerates the letter, screaming that it's just a cruel prank. The message calls him out for his constant denial, and for turning a blind eye to reality. It ends with a chilling finality. There are no do-overs. The weight of this grim prophecy crushes him completely. But the letter from his future self isn't just a warning. It's a brutal takedown of his entire worldview. He struggles to comprehend the message, a letter from his future self. The words echo in his mind. Defeat, disownment, a broken engagement. The butler cries out his name, seeing his young master in distress. Herbert snaps back to reality, dazed and confused. He tries to play it off, stammering that he's fine. He tells the old man not to worry, claiming he's just checking if it's a prank. But his trembling hands betray his inner turmoil. He curses under his breath, annoyed that the letter knows him so well, especially since the handwriting is completely unfamiliar. But more than the handwriting or the message, the butler realizes the portal that delivered it was a form of legendary magic. The sender's message begins with a belated introduction. It claims to be from Herbert himself, 20 years in the future. The name of the magic echoes in his mind. Time-space magic. A power from the age of myths, used by ancient sages to seal the Demon King. A magic capable of impossible feats like teleportation and time travel. Herbert stares at the letter, the implications dawning on him. He can't believe a user of such power would send him a simple prank. And as he examines the note, he comes to a terrifying conclusion. It's real. He swallows hard, realizing his future self has the talent to wield time-space magic. The shock slowly melts away, replaced by a growing grin. As the implications fully sink in, he erupts into a fit of joyous laughter. Time-space magic, the legendary power, is a talent he possesses. His mind races with the possibilities. He can finally make everyone acknowledge his greatness. He slams the letter down onto the table. It asks if he thought becoming a sage would earn him praise. His eyes widen as the words cut deep. The letter questions the very core of his rotten spirit. It tells him there are no do-overs, because this is who he was. That he's alone not because of his power, but his lack of effort. It demands that he finally admit the truth about himself, that his very nature is completely and utterly rotten. He crumples the paper, his hands shaking with fury, and explodes, refusing to believe such a harsh judgment. He stomps his foot, screaming that it's all a lie. The butler watches on, calling out his master's name. Herbert shouts that no one has ever spoken to him this way. but his voice falters as the rage subsides. He sinks to his knees, hit by a crushing realization. The only reason no one called him out was his noble status. The crumpled truth lies at his feet. He slowly picks up the letter again. He knows it's true, remembering the tears and shattered trust. He smooths out the paper, his expression now grimly determined. He finally sees that his followers were never his friends. His tears fall onto the letter as he admits it to himself. He knew. He knew it all along. He just pretended not to notice, hoping it would all work out. He'd somehow managed to get by until this very day. But in the quiet rain, the truth is inescapable. He'll lose the duel, be disowned, and Nell will leave him. And worst of all, his loyal butler will die. The weight of his future failures is too much to bear. He finally breaks down, letting out a raw, childish wail. All his pride and composure wash away in a flood of tears. The butler embraces him as the letter from his future self continues. It explains that it took 20 long years to regain everything he lost, and that even though he tried his best, the things that slipped through his fingers were far too many. He realized the truth far too late. His younger self is different. The letter's final plea is to never forget the regret he feels in this moment. The crumpled message lies on the ground, its grim purpose fulfilled. As the sun hangs low, a quiet resolve settles over the gazebo. Herbert's tears have dried, replaced by a steely gaze. He admits he hated facing the ugly truth about himself. The butler thinks to himself that he never wanted to know such a dark future. But Herbert clenches his fist. A fire reignited within him. He declares that losing everything is a far worse fate. The letter from the future gives him his first instruction. Start trying again. He stands by the window, the light a symbol of his new beginning. The letter commands him to face the duel with everything he has. It reminds him that even though he started this fight, it's now the turning point of his destiny. He declares that from this moment on, things will be different. A confident smile plays on his lips. He turns, his new resolve set in stone. He calls out to his loyal butler. The old man answers the call without hesitation. He asks if the head military officer is available. The butler is completely taken aback by the request. Herbert wants the man to help him with some special training. The old man sprints off, showing more hustle than Herbert has all year. He wonders what was in that letter. But his master's orders are all that matter. The butler notes that Herbert's expression is completely different now. He vows to his grandfather that he will succeed. He remembers a time when he promised to work harder than anyone, and to support the honor of his family's name. The butler, Kevin, calls out for the head military officer, Rodeo. The officer is greeted upon his arrival. A stern man in full plate armor answers the summons. He recalls that the young master was once a prodigy with a sword, a warrior who has seen the boy's potential firsthand. But he also knows that the boy's true talent has been wasted. The officer recalls a time when the young master was single-minded and dedicated. He remembers an incident where the boy fainted from exhaustion, only to jump right back up for another round. A deep regret fills the old warrior's heart. He feels he should have trained the boy's spirit, not just his body. The memory shifts to a roaring crowd chanting Herbert's name. A younger Herbert stands victorious in a grand tournament. Rodeo rushes forward, praising the boy for his hard-earned victory. But the young master simply turns to him with a question. He states that he seems to have a talent for magic, and because of that, he would be making a change. Rodeo's face is etched with disappointment. He remembers the boy declaring he no longer needed his sword. The officer was left standing alone, his best student gone. But now, after all this time, he pushes open the doors to the training grounds. Rodeo announces his arrival, ready for duty. Herbert's eyes widen in surprise. He's already on the ground, exhausted from his own training. He looks up, apologizing for his current state. But Rodeo simply states that it's been a while since their last session. Herbert pants for breath, asking for just a moment to recover. But his hand tightens around the hilt of his training sword. He roars that they should start immediately, lunging forward. Rodeo meets the strike with a simple, effortless block. The impact throws Herbert completely off balance. The officer observes that the boy's swings are visibly slow. His current physical state is clearly hindering his movements. His form is a far cry from what it used to be. Rodeo can't see any trace of the prodigy he once trained. But as he looks into the boy's eyes, he sees the same old fire. But Rodeo tells himself not to be fooled by this sudden change. He insists that the prodigy he once knew is long gone. His thoughts are interrupted by a voice asking if he's here again today. He turns to see another knight stretching by the training grounds. The knight scoffs, saying their little piglet of a master won't be coming. But Rodeo simply begins to state his purpose. He is under orders to train the young master right here. The other knight is stunned, but Rodeo says waiting is part of the job. He serves the ducal family and will do the work he's been assigned. The knight just sighs, asking when the last time Herbert even showed up was. He remembers the last time he saw that fire in the boy's eyes. It was 2 years ago. His own eyes had widened in shock back then. A younger Herbert had charged him with everything he had. Rodeo had countered with blinding speed, the tip of his sword a hair's breadth away. He'd stopped the boy's reckless charge in its tracks. But the impact had been too much for the young master. A wave of regret washed over the officer. He'd rushed forward, realizing this was a terrible mistake. The boy had screamed at him, pulling rank as the Duke's son. But moments later, he was on the ground, completely spent. Rodeo could only look on in disbelief. The young master struggled just to get back to his knees. He'd then thanked Rodeo for the match with a smug grin. The officer's eyes widened at the sheer audacity. He'd closed his eyes, a deep disappointment settling in. He'd claimed his hand had slipped, offering a hollow apology. Rodeo had then called an end to the session for the day, and now Herbert remembers that it's been 2 years since then. Rodeo can only stare, completely baffled by this sudden change. Herbert admits that he was the one who stopped their training, but he insists that he doesn't need a break. He uses his sword to push himself back to his feet, declaring that he won't waste another second of his life. He raises his sword with renewed vigor and demands that they continue the session. Rodeo asks if the young master is truly ready for what's to come. A small smile forms as he decides to have faith in the boy once more. He agrees to train him with everything he's got. The butler arrives with refreshments, acknowledging their hard work. Herbert lies on the ground, completely spent from the grueling session, but he forces himself up, roaring that he's not done yet. Rodeo calmly advises him to rest, saying any more would be pointless. He notes that the young master was already exhausted before they even started. Herbert quietly admits that he was training on his own beforehand. Kevin explains that his master was undergoing intense magic training. Elsewhere, a worried Nell confronts the old butler about Herbert's behavior. Back in the present, Herbert hangs his head on the verge of collapse. He struggles to catch his breath, muttering Rodeo's name. She explains to Rodeo that she has something to show him. A small bolt of energy shoots from her hand. Rodeo notes that it's just a basic fire arrow spell, but as he watches, he realizes something is wrong. The magic within the spell seems to be advancing. It moves at a crawl, so slow he could almost ignore it, and then it suddenly blasts past him at incredible speed. The narrator explains that once cast, a spell's speed is fixed. This is considered common knowledge in modern magic, or at least it was supposed to be. He explains the principle behind his new technique. He asks what Rodeo thinks of its combat potential. Rodeo grabs him by the shoulders, shouting his name. The officer is in disbelief, having never seen such a spell. Herbert explains he layered a slowing spell onto the fire arrow. He calls it delay, a basic form of time-space magic. Rodeo can only stare, the words echoing in his mind. He realizes the immense weight of that term, the very same power used by ancient sages to seal the Demon King. A magic so legendary, it's become the stuff of bedtime stories. A power so rare, it's become a children's bedtime story. Herbert admits that with his current skill, he can only manage this much. And in that moment, Rodeo finally understands. He remembers the day the boy declared he had a talent for magic, and realizes that Herbert wasn't wrong at all. His entire perception of the young master shatters. He sees the same fierce determination from years ago, and he's filled with regret for not believing in his future master. He wonders how he could ever apologize for his disrespect. But Herbert screams that he is the one who should be sorry. He admits that for too long he's lived a lazy, degenerate life. Rodeo realizes the boy had grown complacent, abandoning his efforts, and Kevin can only agree, watching as his master let his talent rust away. But Herbert declares that even if it's too late, he's decided to try again. He looks up at his old instructor, calling out his name, and with a genuine smile, he asks Rodeo to train him once more. The old warrior can only stare, completely taken aback. The boy's face is filled with a hope he hasn't seen in years. Overcome with emotion, Rodeo wipes a tear from his eye. A proud smile spreads across his face. Rodeo promises to see it through with only 2 days until the duel. The first step of his training to improve his spatial awareness. He must learn to visualize complex shapes from every possible angle. Luckily, the letter from his future self included detailed instructions, a training method perfectly optimized for his own aptitude. His intense focus is broken by the arrival of his butler. Kevin stands by, a look of quiet pride on his face. Herbert, drenched in sweat, realizes how much time has passed. The next morning, he prepares himself for the day ahead. He decides that today, he will walk to the academy. He walks with a newfound sense of purpose. He reflects that in the past 3 days, he's done all he could. He remembers Rodeo's harsh words during their training. The officer had warned him that a real fight won't wait for him, He'd pushed himself past his limits, refusing even a moment's rest. The letter had also detailed the strength of his opponent, Marlin. He knows 3 days of hard work can't erase years of laziness. But at the very least, he can face his future without regret. His gaze is sharp, his resolve unshakable. He arrives at the academy wondering why so many students are here on a day off. 2 girls whisper in the crowd, surprised by the turnout. Herbert takes a deep, steadying breath. He realizes their duel has become quite the spectacle. It seems some of the upperclassmen are even placing bets. His former followers note the astonishing odds against him. One cruelly bets on how quickly he'll break down in tears. Their attention, however, has already shifted to another noble. Herbert watches on, the pressure mounting. His old lackeys rush over to greet their new target. Guess they're not exactly the ride or die type. A young noblewoman acknowledges their presence with a knowing look. One of the boys, Ryan, nervously confirms they're here for the duel. The other, Gorer, offers some half-hearted words of encouragement. But the third, Arare, questions their lack of enthusiasm. He puts on a brave face, cheering for Herbert's easy victory. The other 2 look about as convinced as a cat in a bathtub. Herbert smiles, knowing they only came to see him lose. He thanks them anyway and walks toward the arena. His former followers can only watch, completely confused. The girl wonders when she last heard Herbert thank anyone. A student council member grandly addresses the assembled crowd. He introduces himself as Readoki, the official witness for the duel. A stout student explains that a senior noble is overseeing the match. He notes that people worked hard to get permission to use the arena, and that this duel, started by Herbert's tantrum, is now a major event. Herbert's face is a mask of calm determination. His old followers note that he doesn't seem relaxed in the slightest. Marlin glares from across the arena, vowing not to lose to someone like him. The stout student observes Marlin's resolve and quietly states his own intent to win. The crowd erupts, with many cheering for Marlin to win. The text describes Marlin's refined features and well-trained body. He's trained under renowned swordsmen, his skill undeniable. A commoner who stands up to even the most corrupt nobles. And his defiance has caught the eye of a certain princess. She watches on, a pleased smile on her face. Readoki lays out the rules. The duel ends with surrender or disarming. Marlin stands ready, his resolve as sharp as his blade. The crowd roars as the duel officially begins. Everything he has, he earned through his own hard work. Nell can only watch from the sidelines, her face etched with worry. Nell watches from the sidelines, looking thoroughly unimpressed. His old followers, however, look on with nervous anticipation. The witness raises his hand, his voice booming across the arena. And with a single word, the duel begins. Their blades meet in a shower of sparks. And so, the fated battle has finally begun. But there's something about Marlin that Herbert hasn't mentioned. A secret that was never meant to be known. A truth revealed only by the letter from his future self. That this commoner, Marlin, is destined to become the hero. The letter from his future self laid out the entire duel. It predicted Marlin would charge at full speed from the start. In the original timeline, he'd assumed his magic gave him an edge. But the sheer force of the blow proves that assumption wrong. He blocks with both hands, a move that saves him instantly. The letter had warned him about the speed and weight of the attack. He can feel the pressure, the sheer force of his opponent. Marlin's gaze is steady, sizing him up even in the clash. And that's exactly why Herbert makes his move. A stark contrast to the arrogance he once felt. The letter reveals that in the past, he'd planned to use his victory to force his affections on the girl he'd harassed. The memory of his own wretchedness hits him hard. And in that moment of distraction, Marlin strikes. The blow sends Herbert reeling backwards. He collapses to the ground as Marlin tells him this duel would already be over. The future hero asks if he's ready to give up, but the letter's words echo in his mind, telling him to endure the pain. Marlin mocks him, but Herbert realizes something is different about his opponent. The letter explains that his past self failed to notice a crucial detail, but he can. He begins his counterattack, layering his spells with delay magic. He unleashes a barrage of magic directly at Marlin. A combination of fire spells, both basic and advanced. But Marlin stands his ground, completely unfazed. He prepares to cut through the incoming assault with ease. Marlin glares, questioning if magic was even allowed. But Herbert just smirks, revealing the frontal attack was a bluff. The real threat was the spell he'd already placed right behind him. A fireball masked by dust and wind meant to distract and disorient. A move that, by all modern magical theory, should be impossible. Marlin easily deflects the frontal assault. He knows that once a spell is cast, its speed is fixed. So he never even considers an attack from behind. The delayed fireball hits him square in the back. His face contorts in a mixture of shock and rage. Herbert's plan worked perfectly, using wind to hide the spell. And now Marlon is trapped in a storm of wind blades. He just has to endure it until the moment is right. The pain is immense, but his will is stronger. He grits his teeth, pushing through the agony. He realizes this is far more than just the sting of a wooden sword. The blow to his chest is staggering, a pain he's never known. His mind goes blank for a moment. He wonders why he's putting himself through all this agony. The thought creeps in that Marlon is just too strong, that he can't possibly win. Marlon tells him to drop his sword and surrender, to just end it. But Herbert's eyes snap open, filled with a defiant fire. He remembers how he always ran away from a real challenge. But he is not the same person he was before. It hurts, more than he could have imagined, but he's not giving up. He remembers the pain from his training with rodeo, but that was nothing compared to the agony of being ignored. The real pain was lying to himself for all those years. He grits his teeth, holding on just a little longer. Marlon presses his advantage, trying to break through. But in a sudden reversal, Marlon's sword is sent flying. The future hero is stunned, realizing Herbert was only defending. He sees now that the fire magic was just a feint to guide his movements. Herbert calmly asks him to look at what's right behind him. And Marlon realizes with a jolt that his secret has been exposed. But Herbert pushes back with surprising strength. Declaring that this was all part of his plan, Marlon can only stare, completely caught off guard. The letter never mentioned the blows he'd taken, because his future self had simply surrendered. But this time, things are different. He releases the delay magic he'd set in place, a strategy that is entirely his own. The fireball slams into Marlon's unprotected back. The future hero coughs, staggering from the blow. He grits his teeth, enduring the brutal blowback from his own attack. This is a story that has gone completely off script. Herbert explains that he's dragged Marlon into his wind magic. He holds his opponent down in the swirling dust. His eyes gleam, knowing he's finally created an opening. His old followers note that Herbert seems to be far more injured, but Marlon dismisses the damage, refusing to acknowledge the pain. No matter how many times he's hit or how much it hurts, Herbert won't let his opponent escape this position, because another wind spell he'd set in advance is about to be unleashed. A massive gust of wind erupts from the ground. The blast sends both fighters stumbling backwards. Marlon's sword is nearly knocked from his hand. The witness reminds the crowd that a disarm means defeat. Marlon's eyes widen in a moment of pure panic, but he tightens his grip, refusing to surrender. Herbert looms over him, declaring that he's about to end this. He gathers another sphere of wind magic in his hand, unleashing a powerful wind shot directly at his opponent. The spell slams into Marlon's sword with incredible force. His old followers scream from the stands, calling his tactics dirty. But Herbert doesn't care if they call him a coward. Marlon's fans cry out for him not to lose to such a pig. He doesn't care if they make a fool of him, because he knows this is his only chance to win. And he unleashes a relentless barrage of wind shots. His mind flashes back to all the people he's hurt. The terrified maid, the shattered teacup. All because of his own arrogance, anxiety, and jealousy. He remembers screaming at Marlon for daring to be his equal. He was afraid his hard work would amount to nothing, so he ran away from the effort itself. But if this duel is his chance to finally break free, then he will give it everything he has. He pours all his will into one final, desperate push. His mind screams a single, focused command. The wind magic batters against Marlon's desperate grip. He roars for him to let go of the sword. A raw, guttural scream born of pure desperation. And with a final clatter, Marlon's sword hits the ground. Marlon's eyes are wide with utter disbelief. The entire crowd, including his old followers, is stunned into silence. The girl he once harassed can only stare in shock. Even Nell is completely taken aback by this impossible outcome. The future hero falls as his sword clatters to the ground. It lies there in the dust, a symbol of his defeat. Herbert looks down, exhausted and barely processing what just happened. But a slow, triumphant smile begins to spread across his face. He struggles to find the words to speak, and the witness raises his hand, declaring Herbert von Unruh the winner. His old followers can only stare, their jaws on the floor. The crowd murmurs in disbelief. Marlon actually lost. Herbert stands alone, bruised and battered, but victorious. But the arena is silent, with no cheers for the winner. His former lackeys realize that in this quiet, any insult would be heard. He understands that this lonely silence is the result of his past actions. And with that thought, his body finally gives out. But a voice cuts through the silence as Marlon calls his name. The future hero asks what he's even doing this for. And the girl he once tormented can only watch, completely bewildered. She can only whisper Marlon's name in concern. Herbert trembles, the adrenaline finally wearing off. He collapses to his knees, completely spent. But before the winner can be declared, he raises his voice. He shouts that for his actions against Helene and Marlon, and for the disrespect he showed them both, He, Herbert von Unruh, slams his hand to the ground and offers a deep formal apology. The crowd can only stare, utterly dumbfounded by the sight. His eyes are squeezed shut, every ounce of his being focused on this moment. He declares that from the bottom of his heart, he offers his sincerest apologies. Marlon can only stare, wondering what's happening. But Herbert isn't finished yet. He apologizes to the entire crowd for his disgraceful behavior, and with a final bow, he admits that he was wrong. His old followers can't comprehend this sudden personality transplant. Helene rushes over to Marlon, calling out his name. She tells him that Herbert was truly amazing, leaving Marlon stunned. Herbert looks to the sky as if speaking to his future self. He then announces that as the winner, he has a request. A request for his opponent. The now very confused Marlon. He asks Marlon to stand by his side as he tries to change his life. He declares with a smile that this is his one true wish. Marlon and Helene can only stare, completely speechless. Herbert admits that they probably don't understand. So he simplifies his request. He wants them to be friends. He lets out a small laugh as if even he can't believe what he's saying. The sound of exertion hangs in the air. 1 month has passed since his duel with Marlon, and ever since that day, he's trained with rodeo relentlessly. His current goal is to land just one clean hit on the old warrior. He's also kept up his training with time-space magic, pushing himself past his limits every single day. The number of spells he can use has grown, and he's learning how to apply them in a real fight. He takes a confident step forward into his new life. Since the duel, a great many things have changed, and it all started on that day. He began by simply attending his classes at the academy, a simple act that, for him, was a monumental change. Because before, his days were spent elsewhere. He'd used his noble status to skip school and waste his time. But now he sits quietly, a model student. He's determined to change his attitude, one day at a time, a simple resolution he commits to with every fiber of his being. He listens intently during the lecture, but his newfound diligence hasn't changed how others see him. He's still the subject of whispers from his classmates. They whisper about his sudden change in behavior. And given his past, it's no surprise they're keeping their distance. But a voice calls out his name, breaking the silence. It's Nell, his fiancée, watching him from the doorway. Herbert turns to face her, surprised to see her here. She points out the dark circles under his eyes. He asks if she came all this way just to tell him that... The narrator notes that she and Marlon have grown closer since the duel. Herbert admits he knows she's worried because of his request for friendship. She just smiles, saying she'll gladly take advantage of his sincerity. She thinks about his past misdeeds and the way he's trying to atone for them. But she can see that he is genuinely trying to change. The two of them stand alone in the empty lecture hall. She calls out his name, a question in her voice. She tells him it was shameful to deny someone just for being a commoner. Herbert is flustered, asking why she's bringing this up now. She just taps her foot, a knowing look on her face. She tells him to listen to his new friends and get some rest. A warm, genuine smile spreads across her face. Late at night, in a room far from the academy, a single lamp burns, casting a lonely glow. And the man who sent that fateful letter, the Herbert from 20 years in the future, reflects on his past. He remembers the future he described, defeat and disownment, the loss of his engagement to Nell, and the death of his beloved butler, Kevin. He'd spent years fighting to reclaim what he'd lost, eventually becoming a renowned sage, hailed by the masses. But he saw that future as nothing more than pitch-black darkness. He holds the letter, a message from a future he desperately wants to avoid. He admits he can't fully grasp his younger self's heart, but he knows that the boy, the girl, and the loyal butler are all tied to the future he's trying to rewrite. He remembers a world where he was completely alone. With his task complete, he prepares to send his warning. The next day, Herbert has already asked Rodeo for a favor. The officer agrees to arrange a meeting, but the outcome is up to Herbert. That night, the Unruh ducal estate is bathed in moonlight. Inside, Herbert kneels before his parents, the Duke and Duchess. He offers a formal greeting, his first in a long time. His father and mother look down, their expressions unreadable. They admit they've been worried about his recent behavior. Elsewhere, a burly man sits alone, lost in thought. He wonders aloud if this was truly the right thing to do. Helene appears, asking if he's sure about this meeting with the Duke, but she insists it's like good medicine, calling the man her father. She believes Herbert needs a harsh lesson to truly change. Her father admits that Herbert seems to have changed his ways, but his musings are cut short by a flying piece of bread. Helene stands before him, her patience clearly worn thin. She tearfully begs him to stop talking about what happened. He fumbles an apology, calling himself an idiot for upsetting her. Back at the Unruh estate, someone wishes the young master good luck. The Duke looks down, his expression cold and unimpressed. The Duchess seems to share his stern disapproval. Herbert kneels at the bottom of the stairs, a world away from his parents. But a cheerful voice interrupts, telling them not to look so scary. The Duchess asks if they were worried about this family reunion. Herbert begins his confession, admitting to his degenerate lifestyle, and that he's been avoiding them until now. The Duke listens, his expression completely unmoved. He coldly asks what his degenerate son could possibly want,
stating that as the Duke, he has no time for trivial matters.
The Duchess scolds her husband, calling him by name, but Maxim simply closes his eyes, clearly annoyed. She turns to Herbert, saying she hasn't given up on her son. The Duke complains that he tried to reason with her about this meeting. She asks about his health, glad he can finally sleep without medicine. But the Duke's expression remains as cold as stone. He clenches his fist, saying he remembers now. Rodeo told him about some rare magic his son had learned. Herbert looks up, the mention of Rodeo catching him by surprise. He realizes this is why his father agreed to see him. The Duke demands a quick demonstration so they can all get on with their lives. Herbert closes his eyes, steeling his resolve. He tells himself that it's okay if he's the only one who gets hurt. And in his hands, a sphere of pure darkness begins to form. He stands with his arms outstretched, presenting his power. The Duke watches on, his expression still one of utter boredom, but his mother can't hide her nervousness. The sphere of dark magic hangs ominously in the grand hall. Herbert utters a single word, the name of his spell, accelerate. And the sphere rockets across the room at impossible speed. His parents are stunned into silence, their composure shattered. Herbert falls to his knees, explaining it's a basic time-space spell. He looks up, confirming the name of the technique he just used. And the Duke's eyes snap wide, finally realizing the implications. He explains that for now, his magic only works within a field he creates. The Duke dismisses it, wondering if it's just some kind of trick. But his mother knows that no combination of magic could create such an effect. Herbert adds that he's close to mastering another legendary spell. The Duke clutches his head, his mind reeling. He finally understands why Rodeo insisted on this meeting. He remembers his son's violent past, realizing this power is far too dangerous. A chilling thought crosses his mind. If he doesn't take control now, he may be forced to deal with his own son in the worst possible way. He grits his teeth, knowing that before all else, he is a father. The Duke roars that as the head of this kingdom, but Herbert cuts him off with a desperate, shouted apology. He throws himself to the ground in a full, formal bow. The Duke is completely stunned by this sudden act of contrition. Herbert explains that showing his magic was just a means to an end. What he truly wanted was a chance to apologize to them both. His parents can only stare, wondering if this is really their son. His mother rushes to his side as he presses his forehead to the floor. He thinks of his father and mother, and all the people he's hurt. Rodeo, Kevin, Nell, and so many others. He cries out that they were always the ones to reprimand him, that he was only ever forgiven because of his family's name. He sobs that he never truly faced any of them. The Duke is stunned as Herbert recalls how his father never gave up. He'd acted like a child, thinking his tantrums would just pass, and when they stopped, he foolishly thought they'd accepted him. His mother begs him to stop, her voice filled with pain. The Duke can only watch, his stern facade finally cracking. A gentle hand reaches out to the broken boy on the floor, and his mother takes his, pulling him back from the brink. The Duke's eyes remain closed, his expression unyielding. He stands above them, a figure of cold authority. He finally speaks his son's name. He recalls hearing about Herbert's apology after the duel, scolding him for bowing to commoners and lesser nobles. The Duchess looks up, horrified by his words. The Duke mocks him for getting cocky after one small victory. His voice is laced with a cruel, cutting sarcasm. He asks if he should bow his head too to be forgiven. And the Duchess finally snaps, screaming her husband's name. Herbert remains on the floor, his resolve unwavering. He admits that until this very moment, he has been wrong. His mother understands that this is what he needed to do. But the Duke sees it as nothing more than weakness. He roars that it's all the same to him. He coldly asks if that apology was even necessary. Herbert looks up, completely taken aback by the question. The Duke demands to know if he truly thinks it was needed. Herbert flinches but shouts back a firm yes. The Duke's voice is chillingly calm as he says, "Very well." The Duke turns his back on his son, the conversation seemingly over. He thinks that bowing his head would only bring shame to the family name. But a new thought surfaces. Perhaps he was the one who was wrong. He dismisses Herbert for the day, telling him to go rest. He reflects on his failure to truly face his talented, arrogant son. A deep regret settles in his heart. He'd convinced himself that giving up was taking responsibility. His mind flashes back to the day his son was born. He realizes that a child is, by nature, imperfect, and that he had failed to guide the prodigy his son once was. He finally lets out the cry of a child who was never properly scolded. The Duke turns to leave, thinking that he is the one who should apologize. He wonders if his son has truly changed his degenerate ways. Herbert can only look on, completely stunned by this turn of events. The Duke resolves that they will face each other again, because that is what it means to be a family, and with a small hopeful smile, Herbert agrees. Later, the Duke reflects on his own words about family honor. His wife gently reminds him of his harsh stance, and the great Duke can only ask her not to make fun of him. The Duke explains that a child must be dealt with patiently and firmly. Elsewhere, the young maid recalls the head butler bowing to her. He had told her that the young master had truly changed his ways. Kevin's kindness had saved her from being fired after the incident. She was simply reassigned to cleaning duties instead. Her mind flashes back to that terrifying day, and the young master's uncontrollable rage. The shattered teacup was a symbol of his broken state, but since that day, no tea has been spilled. A new day dawns as Herbert's voice asks his father why. A new day dawns, but not for Herbert. She looks deeply troubled by what she's hearing. Her father, the Marquis, offers to repeat his words. He declares that her engagement to Herbert is now officially off. Nell is completely stunned, demanding to know why. But he reminds her of her duty as the family's eldest daughter. Elsewhere, the nobles gossip about Herbert's recent transformation. They wonder if the boy who bowed in the arena has truly changed. Nell clenches her fists, refusing to accept her father's decree. She can't help but wonder if Herbert has truly turned over a new leaf. She insists that he's not the same person he used to be. Elsewhere, the academy grounds are abuzz with gossip. And at the center of it all are his former followers. Gorer, one of the boys from his old crew, along with Ryan and Ari Rai, are recounting his past deeds. One of them points towards a specific location. He draws their attention to a familiar sight, the very spot that Herbert destroyed in his rage. They recall his tantrum over something trivial. They gossip about how the Unruh family paid for the repairs, and how Herbert is now using his time to actually work for a change. His old crew continues to judge him from the sidelines, but the world outside their gossip continues to turn. And Herbert now stands before a man by a fountain. The man thanks him for his help. Recalling how Herbert personally taught his son to use magic, he's grateful that Herbert would help someone with his poor reputation. And our boy simply stands there listening. A voice calls out Herbert's name from a distance. The man and his son wave a cheerful goodbye, and Nell watches the exchange with a gentle smile. The scene shifts to an outdoor cafe, where a young noblewoman asks if Nell has been avoiding Herbert since the duel. Nell just looks on, her expression unreadable. The other girl is none other than Princess Isabella. Nell addresses her with the formal respect her title demands, but the princess just smiles, telling her to be more casual. As Nell begins to explain her side of the story, she admits it's hard to believe Herbert has truly changed. But the princess asks why she'd judge him without even speaking to him. She winks, suggesting Nell should at least hear him out. But Nell seems hesitant, unable to find the right words. The princess just looks on with a knowing smirk. Her mind flashes back to a time when she always walked behind her fiancé. The memory makes the princess blush, telling Nell to stop. Nell just calmly sips her drink, enjoying the moment. A quiet moment hangs between the two of them. As she considers the princess's words, the princess asks Nell if she's afraid. She's afraid that if she actually meets him now, she might end up forgiving him completely. She admits that the person he used to be has simply regained his old charm. She slams her hand on the table in frustration. The princess leans in, asking if she's scared of falling for him again. Nell shoots up from her seat, completely flustered. She shouts the princess's name, her composure completely gone. Guess the princess hit a little too close to home. Meanwhile, a dark, viscous liquid is poured into a cup. A hand reaches for the steaming drink. It's the young maid from that fateful morning. She takes a sip, her face contorting in disgust. She asks what in the world she's just tasted, a stark contrast to the weak tea she'd served before. Kevin, the head butler, stands by with a knowing look. The young maid looks on, a bead of sweat on her brow. He explains that this is how Master Herbert prefers his tea. A flashback reveals that Herbert is extremely sensitive to bitterness. Kevin explains that, to put it bluntly, his master has the palate of a child. The maid can only offer an embarrassed apology for her mistake. The scene shifts to Herbert returning to the estate, greeted by the guards. He walks past the man on duty without a word, but then he suddenly stops in his tracks and offers the guard a deep, respectful bow. The memory brings a gentle smile to the maid's face. She thinks about how foolish she's been, believing that as a servant, she should be the one bowing. and with a newfound respect, she offers a small curtsy of her own. Kevin offers her another cup of the master's preferred tea. She thinks that Herbert probably won't be needing her to make it anymore, but she accepts, deciding to remember the taste just in case. And with a polite thank you, her lesson comes to an end. Elsewhere, under the pale moonlight, a voice declares success. Herbert stares in awe at a sphere of pure darkness he's just created. This is his first intermediate time-space spell, the Dimensional Hole, a legendary magic that creates and maintains a separate space. A pocket dimension where the very flow of time is distorted. It can be used for storage, but requires an object inside to remain stable. It can even be used defensively to absorb incoming attacks. But the mana cost is so immense it would drain a normal mage instantly. It's a difficult magic to handle, but not an impossible one. And with tears of relief, Herbert clenches his fists in triumph. He knows that he has finally made it in time. A wide, determined smile spreads across his face. The scene shifts back to the Unruh ducal estate, where his loyal butler Kevin lies gravely ill. The old man's breathing is shallow, his strength all but gone. He weakly calls out his young master's name. Herbert tells the old man not to speak. Kevin insists that he should save his strength and focus on fighting the illness. He looks down at his butler's frail, spotted arm. An arm that was once so strong now looks like a withered branch. He gently takes the old man's hand in his own. He knows that even now something inside Kevin is turning to stone. The letter had warned him of this rare disease, the evil god's breath. A horrifying illness that turns a person's body to stone from the inside out. It's the reverse of the creation myth, where a god breathed life into stone. This is a curse that turns life back into unfeeling rock. The text explains this disease is a 1 in a million affliction. With no known cure, the old man can only call out his master's name. He insists that he has lived a full and satisfying life. But Herbert isn't having any of this noble sacrifice talk. The old man admits this came sooner than he'd expected. He tells him to stop talking nonsense, insisting he still needs him. But Kevin sees that his young master is already moving forward. So Herbert takes his hand, a silent promise to not let him go. The butler tries to reassure him, saying a new maid is taking care of him, and that she is doing a fine job in his stead. He jokes that the tea is just too bitter, and that Kevin is the only one who can make it right. He says he still wants to drink the tea his butler makes, so he'll just have to keep living right by his side. Kevin's breath hitches, overcome with emotion. He apologizes for making his master talk so much, but Herbert insists that he will handle this illness. He tells him that's why he needs him to trust him and to wait. And with that promise, the old man finally rests. Kevin whispers that he's always believed in his young master. The young maid can only watch, her expression filled with worry. Herbert turns his head, a quiet resolve in his eyes. He tells her there's no need to hesitate. He walks away, the name of the disease echoing in his mind. He knows there is no known cure for this petrifying illness. The letter had been brutally clear. Kevin is destined to die. It was the greatest crisis his future self had warned him about. But Herbert stands firm because he knows something else. He knows that in the future a cure for this disease was found. The letter also contained the recipe for the cure, and now he just needs the ingredients. He stands before his father, who agrees to lend Rodeo for his son's training. Herbert thanks him for his support, but the Duke adds a condition. He states that he cannot spare any other soldiers for this quest. The vast hall separates the two, a symbol of the weight of this request. Herbert understands, noting that moving the army could be misinterpreted by the kingdom. His father looks out the window, agreeing with his son's assessment. He then asks if Herbert has another option in mind. Our boy confirms that there is someone suitable for the task, and the Duke's eyes narrow as he realizes his son's true plan. The Duke looks deeply troubled by this new development. He knows the materials for this cure are in a dangerous land, and he can't believe his son wants to go there himself. But Herbert insists that he is the only one who can... The Duke wonders if this has something to do with his time-space magic. A sudden horrifying thought crosses his mind about the cure's creation, but he quickly dismisses it, deciding it's better not to know. Herbert offers a grateful smile, thanking his father for his concern. The cure for the evil god's breath requires a special herb called stone root, and once prepared, the medicine loses all potency within 2 days. He realizes all his training for the dimensional hole has been leading to this very moment. He struggles to maintain the unstable magic. It almost collapses, a bead of sweat on his brow. But he finally manages to stabilize the void. He carefully places a teacup inside the portal, because within this pocket dimension, time itself slows to a crawl. He can store the stone root inside and bring it back fresh. He vows to Kevin that he will return with the cure. Meanwhile, Marlin's own unique talents are being recognized at the academy. The text explains that light magic users are being sought out to keep an eye on the Duke. And so, Marlin finds himself face to face with Herbert's father. He offers his sincere gratitude for the opportunity, but the Duke tells him not to worry, mentioning the princess's interest in him. He only asks that Marlin continue to be a good friend to his son. And so their parallel training begins, Marlin mastering light magic and Herbert mastering time-space combat. The future hero and the future sage, training in secret for the days to come. Herbert will become a healer and a reliable travel companion, while Marlin is molded into the perfect, complete hero. A new party is formed, ready to face whatever the future holds. And so Herbert, Marlin, and Rodeo set out on their quest. Herbert offers a quiet apology for dragging them along. Marlin turns, a bit confused by the sudden sentiment. Herbert smirks, noting he pulled a top student away from his studies. But Marlin just smiles, admitting he doesn't care for awards. Rodeo asks if Herbert is truly okay with this arrangement. Our boy admits his reputation at school is already rock bottom, so really it's not like things could get any worse. Besides, there's a far more important reason for all this. As back at the estate, Kevin's life hangs in the balance. Herbert clenches his fist, his resolve set in stone. He knows there is no time to spare on this journey. Rodeo listens intently as they begin their long trek. The three of them set out into the wilderness. The old warrior suggests they review their objectives one last time. First, they must acquire the stone root from a C-rank danger zone. Second, they'll take it to a pharmacist in a nearby village. And third, Herbert must use his time-space magic to keep it all fresh. Rodeo asks if he's missed any of the finer details. Herbert just gives a tired nod, clearly ready to get this show on the road. He adds one final detail. They'll be passing through a small village, but he knows he's only told Rodeo the bare minimum. The old warrior hasn't asked a single question, simply trusting his master. He hasn't asked how Herbert knows the cure for an incurable disease, or why they need a village pharmacist when he has time-space magic. Herbert couldn't bring himself to lie to Marlin about the potential dangers, so he simply turns to his friend and asks for his strength. And Marlin agrees without a single moment of hesitation. Herbert is stunned, pointing out he hasn't even explained anything yet. But Marlin knows the man Herbert has become, and that's all he needs. Marlin reflects that Herbert only makes this face when he's being completely and utterly sincere. And our boy looks up, offering his genuine thanks to them both. The future hero can only offer a shy smile in return. But Rodeo reminds him it's far too early for gratitude. Herbert just laughs, the three of them ready for the road ahead. Their destination is a place called Kotoko Village. Rodeo explains it's a small hamlet on the edge of the danger zone, a place where even low-level monsters are known to roam. He asks if Herbert understands why there are no carriages out here. Herbert's face flushes as he processes the word. Monsters. Rodeo explains this is a C-rank danger zone, not a place for the inexperienced. He insists that on this journey that's one rule he will not bend. Marlin agrees, telling Herbert he understands the old warrior's caution. But Marlin senses something else lurking in the nearby trees. Rodeo notes that the future hero has some sharp senses. Herbert realizes with a jolt that it's not just one. The old warrior confirms there are three, with more lying in ambush. He drops his pack, deciding they'll face the ones in front directly. He'll handle the frontal assault, while the boys take care of the ambushers. Rodeo's hand tightens around the hilt of his sword. The grass rustles as the hidden enemies emerge, and a trio of goblins burst from the undergrowth. Rodeo meets their charge with a brutal, sweeping strike. He cuts them down in a single, fluid motion. He roars for Herbert and Marlin, telling them it's their turn. Herbert is caught off guard as another goblin lunges at him. The text confirms this creature is a goblin, a creature described as one of the weakest monsters in existence. Small, weak, but surprisingly tough for their size. The text explains that goblins are simple creatures, hunting in packs and ambushing their prey, and Rodeo could have easily wiped out every last one of them. But in the face of this single, simple monster, Herbert is completely frozen. He's paralyzed by a fear he's never known. His mind flashes back to his old followers mocking his expensive armor. They'd warned him that his face and limbs were still vulnerable. He'd brushed it off, thinking he knew what a real fight was like. But the thugs he'd faced before were nothing like this. Is fighting with the intent to kill, and in a desperate panic, Herbert unleashes a flame lance. The sky is quiet, the birds undisturbed by the fight below. But on the ground, Herbert is completely spent from that one attack. The goblin he faced is now nothing more than dust. A single panicked spell was all it took to end the threat. Rodeo explains that for all their weakness, goblins are surprisingly resilient, but not so resilient that they need an intermediate spell to be put down. He warns Herbert to conserve his magical energy for real threats. Herbert mutters an excuse, blaming his overkill on old habits. Rodeo just turns away, clearly not buying it for a second. But the truth is, his hand won't stop shaking from the sheer terror of it all. It was a spell he could cast without thinking, his go-to move. A move born from pure panic and overwhelming fear. He admits to himself that a real fight is terrifying. He tries to laugh it off, claiming he was just a little rattled. But Rodeo tells him that fear is a good thing to remember. Because on the battlefield, it's what keeps you alive. The two boys can only listen, a bit sheepishly. The old warrior decides they'll press on to the village and gain more experience along the way, and Herbert quietly agrees, his resolve hardening once more. Rodeo explains that out here they are a single party. He tells them to forgive him if he drops the formal speech. Herbert smirks, saying it's not so bad to be called a companion, but his nervous sweat tells a very different story. A small smile forms on Rodeo's face, seeing right through the act, and with that, Herbert eagerly leads them into the sunset. They finally arrive at Kotoko Village as night settles in. Rodeo notes they can avoid camping outside, much to Herbert's relief. Their first stop, however, is the local apothecary. Rodeo ushers them inside before the night gets any darker. Rodeo and Herbert step into the dimly lit shop, but they stop short just inside the door. The place seems quiet, almost empty. A small hooded figure tells them to state their business. Rodeo seems to recognize the person, looking stunned. The figure stammers, nervously clasping their hands. She introduces herself as the pharmacist, Ashitaba. Herbert watches the exchange, a bit confused. She nervously asks who they are and what they want. Herbert can't help but notice she seems awfully young to be a pharmacist. He apologizes for his delayed introduction and formally states his name, Herbert von Unruh, a name that carries the weight of a ducal family. The young pharmacist is completely stunned by this revelation. She scrambles in a sudden panic and throws herself to the ground, apologizing for her rudeness. Herbert is taken aback, insisting she raise her head. The quiet tension hangs heavy in the dimly lit shop. He decides to get straight to the point. He explains that someone close to him has the evil god's breath. The young pharmacist's eye snaps wide in utter shock. Herbert explains that he has the recipe for the cure, but the name of the disease alone is enough to terrify her. She bows her head, completely overwhelmed, and addresses him with the formal respect due to a noble. Herbert can only watch, confused by her sudden change. But her quiet fear suddenly erupts into a furious outburst. She screams that there is no cure for the evil god's breath. She insists he's being deceived and must return to the patient at once, begging him to spend every last second he can with them. She cries, recalling 2 other patients she lost to the very same disease. Herbert sees that she gets far too emotionally invested in her work. He knows that a pharmacist can't survive by carrying such a heavy burden. But a single tear falls, as Herbert insists that her compassion is exactly why he sought her out. He holds out the recipe, a copy from the letter. She hesitantly agrees to look it over, but as she reads, her eyes widen in disbelief. She stands at her counter, completely absorbed by the text. The impossible recipe hangs in her hand, defying everything she knows. Rodeo and Herbert watch the young pharmacist intently. Outside, Marlin waits patiently for them to finish. Ashitaba admits there's no proof this recipe will even work. But she realizes no one has ever tried this method before. A completely new approach to an incurable disease. She breaks down, wondering if this could truly save people. Herbert just stands there, not quite sure how to handle all the waterworks. She explains that the cure requires an untested herbal medicine. The main ingredient is a fresh, high-quality stone root, and to get it, they must travel to a dangerous territory. Herbert explains he has a way to solve the freshness problem. She asks if he can truly manage such a feat. He gives a firm, confident nod in response. He tells her they'll set out at dawn, as time is short. Rodeo then steps forward with a heavy bag. He places a bag of money on the counter for the other ingredients, a bag so full it practically sparkles. Ashitaba is stunned by the sheer amount of coin, but Herbert insists that for rare items, money is no object. She closes her eyes, accepting the weight of this new responsibility. She clenches her fist, her resolve hardening, and Ashitaba formally accepts the request to prepare the cure. Herbert smiles, thanking her and promising a generous reward, but she holds up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. She insists the money he's already paid is more than enough, but she has one condition. Herbert can only look on, confused by this sudden turn. She nervously fidgets, trying to find the right words. She asks if she can share the recipe with the guilds once it's proven to work. Herbert's eyes widen, completely caught off guard by the request. He's stunned that she would ask for something so selfless. She explains her wish is to reduce the suffering in the world, and that saving lives would be the greatest reward of all. The text explains that in 7 years, this cure would be discovered anyway, so Herbert agrees, permitting its release under his family's name. Ashitaba is overjoyed, calling this the best reward she could ask for. She leans over the counter, her passion for her work reignited. And so, Herbert extends his hand to seal their new partnership. The young pharmacist can only stare, completely bewildered. He just smiles, waiting for her to accept the formal agreement. She nervously takes it, feeling unworthy of such a gesture. Their destination is the old Flugel territory, a C-rank danger zone, a land that was once destroyed by a massive horde of monsters. Its former lord, Count Flugel, died fighting to save his people. A tragedy that happened long before the current king's reign. Back in the village, Ashitaba looks on with a new resolve. Her eyes are filled with a quiet, unwavering determination. Meanwhile, the boys arrive at the ruins, a place reclaimed by nature. The air is thick with a clinging miasma and the presence of monsters. This is the territory of chaos, and they must go deeper to find the stone root. And so, they take their first steps into the forgotten land. Herbert's gaze is steady, his resolve firm, but their path is blocked by a pile of reanimating bones. He watches in disgust as the creature takes shape. It's a skeleton, a D-rank monster from the depths of this land. He wonders if this is what became of the people who once lived here. The letter had told him the grim fate of Count Flugel. It also warned that monster activity has been increasing for 20 years. A slow, creeping threat that pushes humanity back. He thinks of the Count, who died protecting his children and his land, and he wonders what would happen if his own people faced such a threat. Rodeo screams out the young master's name in alarm, but Marlin is already on it, sending the skeleton flying. He shatters its massive skull with a single, powerful blow. The creature crumbles into a pile of useless bones. Herbert explains this is a result of the dragon's tooth curse, and that destroying a specific tooth is the key to defeating them. He smugly asks if Rodeo remembers this from his lessons. The old warrior just gives a tired, resigned agreement. Herbert apologizes, admitting he's a bit overexcited. But Rodeo warns him that such excitement on the battlefield often leads to an early grave. Rodeo tells him to be careful, and Herbert simply agrees. He stands before the undead, the remnants of this fallen land. He thinks of his people, his territory, the trust of his family, and the heart of the woman he loves. He declares that he has no intention of losing a single thing. He roars that he is the one who must protect it all. A raw scream of pure, unyielding determination. Marlin notes that Herbert seems a little too fired up. Rodeo can only agree, watching his master's sudden fervor. But as Herbert fights, his eyes lock onto something unexpected. Rodeo's expression is tense, as if he's growing impatient. He notes that the miasma in the air is finally starting to thin. The three of them look up, sensing a change in the atmosphere. Herbert thinks their destination must be close, feeling it was all too easy. But Marlin's eyes widen, spotting something up ahead. 2 suits of armor stand before them, clanking to life. Rodeo identifies them as golems forged from old armor, a rare C-rank monster not often seen in these parts. He pushes Herbert back, shielding him from the immediate danger. The old warrior declares that he'll take one, leaving the other for the boys. He warns them that this opponent is far more dangerous than the last. The old warrior draws his blade and charges forward with a mighty roar. His sword meets the golems in a shower of sparks. The two are locked in a brutal test of strength. Marlin urges Herbert to act while Rodeo has it pinned down, but Herbert declares that he won't be using any magic. Marlin can only stare, completely stunned by this decision. Herbert knows they must conserve their mana for the journey back, and he refuses to waste it on a fight like this, so he lunges forward with everything he has. But the impact sends a shockwave through his entire body, and he's sent flying backwards by the sheer force of the blow. He realizes with a jolt that he completely misjudged its power. This monster is far stronger than he could have ever imagined. He closes his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. But Marlin steps in, standing between him and the golem. The future hero finds a weak point and drives his sword home, and the armored creature collapses into a pile of scrap. Marlin explains that the key was to destroy its core. Herbert admits that he knew the theory, but it wasn't enough. Marlin tells him to rely on his companions a little more. Herbert realizes his recent efforts were just a quick fix. Marlin offers a hand, asking what he thinks he's lacking. The three of them stand together, a united party. They press on, deeper into the forgotten territory. Rodeo explains that the stone root grows by absorbing miasma, meaning it thrives in places where monsters are scarce. And just ahead, they find the end of their long journey. A vast field of the flowers, a truly magnificent sight. The three of them can only stare at the sight before them. The stone root, the key to saving Kevin's life. Herbert recalls the instructions from the letter, a specific method for harvesting the herb correctly. Rodeo confirms his memory, a proud look on his face. But his expression suddenly shifts to one of pure terror. He lets out a raw, desperate scream, roaring for Marlin to get down immediately. Herbert can only watch, frozen in utter shock, as one of them is slammed violently to the ground. Marlin shoves Herbert to the ground, tackling him out of harm's way. Herbert's eyes are wide with shock, a bead of sweat on his face. A monstrous clawed hand slams down where he just stood. Rodeo realizes the golems were just a distraction from a greater threat, and the old warrior lies defeated on the ground. A shadowy figure stands over him, the true enemy revealed, and the words from the letter echo in Herbert's mind. It warned of a powerful, bloodthirsty foe, an enemy of all humanity. He whispers the name of this new threat, a demon. The letter had described them as humanoid monsters, beings that possess the features of beasts. They have immense physical strength and magical power far beyond any human. Their very bodies defy all natural laws, and they are defined by their extreme aggression and a deep, sadistic cruelty. Herbert stands his ground, sweat beading on his face. He's terrified, facing a real demon for the very first time. But Herbert draws his sword, his expression grim. Rodeo cries out his master's name in alarm, but Herbert closes his eyes, steadying his resolve. He tells the demon that it is not their true objective, and that they have no reason to fight here and now. He knows that humans and demons have long been enemies, but asks if they can't just put their weapons away. The demon's answer is a raised axe, and Rodeo leaps in to block the devastating blow. He grits his teeth, calling out to his young master. The demon sneers, saying that humans are simply an eyesore. Herbert realizes that negotiation is officially off the table, but a new slender figure appears, offering a strange apology. The first demon, Disley, tells Rodeo that its patience has run out. Herbert's eyes dart back and forth, trying to assess the new threat. The newcomer's body seems almost translucent, its movements hard to follow. It apologizes for its delayed entrance. Introducing itself as Ignoa, it says it's customary to name itself to those it's about to kill. Marlin calls out to Herbert, his gaze fixed on the tip of Ignoa's sword, and the second demon stands before them, ready for battle. Ignoa lunges forward, screaming for Marlin to die. Marlin realizes the demon was channeling magic into its blade while talking. Herbert knows that if it can spam that attack, they're in serious trouble. But Marlin charges in, ready to meet the threat head-on. Their blades meet in a blinding flash of power. Herbert unleashes a flame lance to support him. The demon grunts, caught off guard by the spell. Rodeo roars for them to press the attack, warning that any mistake will be fatal. The other demon, Disley, watches on, wondering if Ignoa is just playing around. Ignoa asks Marlin if he's a worthy opponent to face. Disley asks if the old warrior truly thinks he can win. But Rodeo answers with a powerful swing of his sword. His face is a mask of grim determination. The blade cuts deep into the demon's chest. The creature seems almost impressed by the human strength, but the wound steams and heals in a matter of seconds. Rodeo realizes with a jolt that this demon can regenerate. Disley smirks, knowing he'll have to be taken down in a single blow. On the other side of the battlefield, Marlin lets out a fierce battle cry, and his sword clashes with Ignoa's in a blinding flash of light. Herbert struggles to keep his eyes on the translucent demon. Its body remains almost invisible as it attacks without pause. Marlin holds the line, doing everything he can to keep the creature contained. The demon mocks their efforts, finding their struggle almost painful to watch. Marlin grits his teeth, realizing that even together they can't land a clean blow. Ignoa warns that its companion, Disley, is far stronger than it is. It continues its taunts, saying their inevitable defeat is almost tragic. But Herbert has had enough of its condescending monologue. He unleashes a sharp blade of wind magic, but the spell barely scratches it, as the demon is resistant to the 4 basic elements. The text explains that physical attacks are useless against its ore-like body, and even his time-space magic can't seem to land a decisive blow. Herbert panics, unsure of what he can possibly do. He knows he's the one who has to act. He parries a blow, his own blade glowing with power. Marlin tells him to rely on his friends for once. Herbert realizes he can't do this alone. The weight of that truth settles heavily on him. So Marlin charges forward, taking the lead, but he realizes with a jolt that he's made a mistake. Herbert screams for him to stop, knowing it's a foolish move. But Ignoa takes the opening, driving its blade through his chest. The crystalline weapon pierces his armor with ease, and Herbert coughs, a dark substance spilling from his lips. Marlin can only scream his name in utter horror. The force of the blow sends our boy stumbling backwards. Marlin reaches out, watching his friend fall. The wound is deep, the damage severe. He struggles to even breathe from the pain. He collapses, realizing his special wyvern armor was useless. Ignoa notes that the blow wasn't immediately fatal, but it admits the wound is still incredibly deep. Herbert struggles to his knees, asking for his armor. His hand reaches out, stained and trembling. He clutches the wound, trying to endure the agony, but a defiant smirk forms on his face. Enraged, the demon drives a strange vial into his chest. The contents explode on impact. Ignoa seethes, calling him a little brat. But Herbert looks up, as if he has something more to say. He realizes that Marlin can use healing magic. The future hero is stunned by this sudden revelation. Herbert knows that if he can't win this fight alone, then he'll just have to rely on his friend. Marlin accepts without a moment of hesitation. He turns to the demon, vowing that it will not pass, and he holds his ground against the creature's relentless assault. He admits it's much easier to fight now that he can see it clearly. The demon Ignoa seethes, its invisibility now completely useless, and Marlin drives his blade forward with renewed strength. The demon's crystalline body cracks under the force of the blow. Marlin screams out Herbert's name, his eyes wide with concern. But Herbert's gaze is steady, his resolve unbroken by the pain. He shouts that he used his own body as bait to create this opening, and with what little strength he has left, he tells Marlin to act now. Marlin drives his sword home as the demon seethes at this turn of events. It scoffs, wondering if a little injury is supposed to stop it. It declares that playtime is over, its voice filled with murderous intent. Elsewhere, the other demon, Disley, stands ready. Rodeo calmly notes that his opponent is finally getting serious. Disley roars at his companion for losing to a pair of humans, but Rodeo just smiles, telling the demon he's mistaken. Disley raises his massive weapon, intrigued by this defiance. He slams it down with earth-shattering force. Rodeo explains that the boy he dismissed is the kingdom's second sage, and that they have no intention of falling to the likes of them. The demon Disley admits this is becoming a problem. He's stunned by the old warrior's unwavering stance. Rodeo roars that to his master, they are nothing but a stepping stone. And the demon explodes with rage at the human's audacity. Marlin unleashes a furious counterattack. The demon curses as the blade connects. Ignoa stumbles back, stunned by the blow. It roars that it will kill them for their insolence. Marlin shouts out Herbert's name, pressing the attack, and drives his sword deep into the demon's chest. But Herbert realizes something is happening, an unexpected sight that catches them both off guard. The text explains that the demon's body is weak to light magic, and Ignoa seethes, realizing Marlin's divine protection is its ultimate weakness. Herbert screams for Marlin to use that move. The future hero is stunned for a moment, but he understands immediately. The text explains Marlin's ultimate technique, a powerful but draining light spell. Herbert insists that if he can land just one hit, it will be enough to win. The demon Ignoa seethes, its body still fractured from the last attack. Marlin holds his ground, deflecting another desperate strike. The demon mocks their efforts, vowing to kill them both before they can act. But Herbert sees that its movements are now erratic, a sign of its desperation. Marlin gathers a sphere of light, knowing the spell will consume everything, including Herbert. But our boy just tells him not to hesitate, ready to face the consequences. He screams for Marlin to unleash the attack, not to miss this chance. And Marlin unleashes a blinding wave of light magic. The demon Ignoa is caught in the blast, its body beginning to shatter. It looks down in disbelief, unable to comprehend its defeat. Its crystalline form cracks and crumbles under the holy power. Marlin had expected Herbert to use his magic to escape the blast radius. But in that moment, Herbert is using his time-space magic for another purpose. A swirling vortex of darkness begins to form. He unleashes his intermediate spell, the dimensional hole. A technique that creates a separate space, controlling the very battlefield around them. The text explains that absorbing attacks with this magic drains an immense amount of mana. The demon seethes, calling them nothing but brats. Marlin can't believe Herbert is still conscious after that blast. But our boy stands firm, the void in his hands mirroring the hole in the demon's chest. He tells Marlin not to worry, insisting this was all part of the plan. But his vision blurs as he feels his life force being drained away. He knows he just needs one more move to end this. His mind flashes back to his past mistakes, and he declares that this is where they end. He declares that this is as far as his old self goes, and that everything he's accomplished until now is just the beginning of who he will become. He roars that he will save his butler and forge a new future. He bites his lip, pouring his very life force into the dimensional hole. The demon can only stare as the magic is redirected right at it. With a trembling voice, he forces himself to stand tall, and introduces himself as Herbert von Unruh, a name it won't forget. The creature is stunned, unable to comprehend this strange power, and Herbert prepares to release the dimensional hole. He shoves the swirling vortex of darkness into the demon's chest, and with that, Ignoa's consciousness fades from this world forever. Marlon calls out to Herbert asking if he's still alive. He manages a weak reply, saying he's somehow okay. Herbert lies on the ground, a relieved smile on his face. He tells Marlon to get the mana potions to Rodeo, but a voice asks who they're trying to help. It's Rodeo, battered and bruised but still standing. He apologizes for not getting here sooner, explaining he had to make sure his own opponent was finished for good. Herbert asks what they were supposed to do if Rodeo had been taken out, but the old warrior states that wouldn't have happened because Marlon was still standing. The shattered remains of the demon lie scattered across the ground. Rodeo explains that this is the nature of battle, and that's all there is to it. After drinking every last mana potion they had, the two boys rest while Rodeo stands guard over them. They must recover quickly, bring back the stone root, and save the life that hangs in the balance. He has to save the one butler who never abandoned him, and as he lies there exhausted, he renews his vow. Back in the village, Ashitaba looks on with nervous anticipation. The text confirms that the young pharmacist has fulfilled her contract. Herbert presents the stone root, asking if its quality is sufficient. She beams, confirming that with this, she can create the cure. The text explains that with the medicine prepared, Herbert carefully places it inside his dimensional hole. And so, the three of them begin their long journey home. He feels his magic and stamina slowly draining away, but a quiet, determined smile never leaves his face. The text notes that despite his exhaustion, sleep never came. Back at the Unruh ducal estate, the moment of truth has finally arrived. Kevin is overcome with tears of pure joy. He bows, ashamed that Herbert went to such trouble for him. But Herbert insists that's not the point, because more than anything, the old man is just so happy. He can't believe his master would do all this for him. Herbert just tells him to calm down because he's still needed. The loyal butler stands, his health fully restored, and he vows to serve by his master's side until his last breath. A new day dawns, a quiet end to their long journey. Herbert asks if this means they can finally rest for a while, and Marlon agrees with a quiet, content smile. Herbert looks on, a sense of relief washing over him. Marlon reflects that for the past few months, they haven't stopped moving. He lists everything Herbert has done, from the duel to his first real battle. He's learned to work hard and to accept that he can't do it all alone. Herbert calls out to his friend, a thoughtful look on his face. Marlon turns, wondering what's on his mind, and our boy asks if he's lost a little weight. Nell points out that he's been losing weight ever since the duel. Herbert just smiles, admitting it's the result of all his hard work. He tries to laugh it off, but the moment hangs between them. The scene shifts, jumping forward several months in time, to the great sea of trees, where a lone hooded figure stands. A small, knowing smile plays on their lips.